Hello and welcome to this week's bonus episode of Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Last week I interviewed Matt Leininger. Matt's the head of democracy innovation at the National Conference on Citizenship. He explained a whole different ways of potential organizing in political processes, how to innovate democracy, and gave examples of different models that are being used from participatory budgeting to citizens' assemblies, and explained at length how the more that you engage citizens in the process of democracy and governance, power, the more engaged that they become, the better the outcomes are for everyone. He gave a really fantastic explanation of how we are using 20th century institutions in a 21st century world with 21st century citizens who are more educated and less deferent to authority. And that's causing this sort of mismatch and the tension that we're seeing right now in our quote unquote advanced democracies. So really brilliant episode. I highly recommend that you go and listen to it. One thing Matt says at the beginning of the episode is people talk about needing to save democracy. Really, we need to be talking about improving it. And that's really stuck with me. I suppose talking about saving democracy in our advanced democracies shows a kind of arrogance, thinking that we might have the best system or that this is the best it's ever going to be. So let's just stick with what we've had and, count our chickens type thing. And when really we need to always be innovating, always be looking to do better, and always be looking to engage with the world that we live in now, rather than using the institutions of the past and the laws of the past that worked for then that maybe are no longer applicable. It kind of impedes the idea that citizens now deserve better than what they have and are actually capable of coming up with better processes than the ones that we've been using for about 100 years. And it seems mad to think that innovation wouldn't be at the heart of this political process. We have, as mankind, human beings, we've gone through so many different ways of organizing ourselves. And a lot of countries managed to get rid of your monarchies. Well done, guys. And create parliaments and governments that were run by elected officials. Why not do more now, especially using technology to engage people and invite decisions to be deliberated and made at the grassroots level? I think it's really, really interesting that we use tech for so much of our modern life. It is everywhere. It is our banking. It is how we arrange, our travel. It is how most of us do our jobs as well. And yet, when it comes to voting and governance, there's this sort of tech phobia, because people are afraid of being hacked or whatever, as if being hacked anywhere else wouldn't be a problem. But really, when it comes to the voting system, that would be the end of the world. That just sort of seems mad in a world where, you've got nuclear things linked to computer systems, surely. It just seems like an excuse, a very, very lazy excuse to not bring governance into the 21st century. Now, why would there be an excuse to not bring governance into the 21st century? I think that there is a genuine rhetoric and a concerned rhetoric about those in power being corruptible, not wanting people to make educated decisions, not wanting people to become citizens rather than laborers. This is a point I make in the episode. But Matt gives a really, really nuanced response, which I particularly enjoyed, which is that the relationship between citizen and elected official still exists. And elected officials are often afraid to take risks because of they need to get voted in every time. And because there can be this sort of outrage from their constituents. The less that constituents are involved in the decision-making process, the more outrage there might be about their official's decision because they haven't been involved in the step-by-step process of making that decision and therefore haven't received the same information as that official. And then if there is outrage, that official is less likely, Matt says, to make a different decision next time. And I enjoyed this analysis because I think that there's a lot of people that go into governance with the genuine desire to do better, to do right by their community, and to explain the power that citizens still have, even if it's sort of emotional power, even if taking one vote every 4 or 5 years actually isn't particularly having your voice heard and it isn't it is still a form of exerting power in a sense if it's impeding radical decisions from being made purely because the communication between official and constituents have broken down. So I think what's great about deliberative democracy is that it suggests that not only would citizens feel better and do better and make really great decisions and feel more empowered by being involved in the process, it actually makes elected officials' jobs much easier as well. And it allows for more radical ideas to make it through the gatekeepers. And frankly, radical ideas are what we need right now, considering the poly crisis that we live in, whether it's political, whether it's economic, whether it's ecological, energy, all of the things that we cover on the podcast. Now, of course, it's an age-old maxim that power corrupts. And we see every day in the news that there are plenty of people in powerful decisions who have been corrupted and make wrong decisions or make decisions that outright harm their constituents, their citizens. And so we definitely need systemic reform in order to better understand how not to create those kinds of people once they make it into positions of power. And what I think I particularly enjoy about the idea of deliberative democracy is it creates these nodes of communities and these networks, which, if you manage to scale that up from local level to a national level, i.e., a system of local networks all engaging with one another and spreading information through them, and bottom up from the local level to the federal level, that starts to look like an ecosystem. And that starts to look like an ecosystem that is incredibly resilient because it's so diverse. This is what we know from ecology. The more diverse an ecosystem is, the more resilient it is. And I think what we're seeing now around the world is that our political institutions, our political systems are not at all resilient because they play by this zero-sum power game. This is something else Matt mentions during the episode. This pervading belief that there is a limited amount of power in the world. And therefore, to take power from somebody else is literally that, to take from, to diminish the amount of power they have, rather than understanding that power can be created collectively, that there isn't an upper limit on power. And I'm going to really paraphrase here, but if it's shared amongst people, and that the more power that you give back to people, the more that there is. And perhaps this zero-sum game is that the more power you give to one person, there probably is an upper limit on what they can wield and how much of it they can wield, because they can't be everywhere at once, because there's only so much information that one person can hold in their heads. Because I'm thinking about now I don't know enough about this, but I'm going to try and say it anyway. I'm thinking about in the United Kingdom, why the monarchy created this system of lords. It was because the king's army was not powerful enough to sort of manage the whole country. And so he had to spread his power out amongst other people in order to still maintain a general power. So there's an upper limit, right, on what one person can have, or maybe one institution. But if you spread it out over local communities, perhaps that just creates more and more collective resilient power that's part of a greater system and stops power from coalescing in one individual node or network or space. And I think rather than having a top-down approach, which means that if something breaks right at the top, and I think the election of Donald Trump is such a great example of this. The Republican Party backed this guy, and now so many of the governors and elected officials in the Republican Party have completely lost any sense of values or principles that the Republican Party was founded on. So something broke at the top, and it has cascaded down through the party. And it has allowed for monstrous decisions to be made at the Supreme Court, which is having a terrible impact on women and probably every other vulnerable community soon in the next few years all around the country. So there's this real danger of putting so much power at the top. I don't think deliberative democracy actually is necessarily a bottom-up process. And because I don't think systems are necessarily bottom-up processes. I just don't have another word for it. But I think what is so great about a systemic democratic process, or about a bottom-up process, for lack of a better word right now, is that if one part of the system starts to malfunction, the rest of the network can respond and react and essentially do something about it, because it's not happening with the authority. It's not the authority that's going wrong and nobody else can say anything about it because they're further down in the hierarchy. it's quite literally like some part is broken, and it's everybody's responsibility to try and fix that, because otherwise there will be a systemic impact, and everybody has responsibility for the entire system as a functioning component of that system, but not responsibility in the authoritarian sense of wielding the system or managing the system as a whole. And that just sounds like such a resilient way of organizing, of engaging people, of creating happier citizens, and of allowing for the creativity, innovation, participation, collectivism, community that we need to navigate the next decade. All right, that's enough for me. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If you're new here, do remember to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you can find out more about Planet Critical on planetcritical.com. You can also choose to support Planet Critical on planetcritical.com or on Patreon. Both the links are in the description box below. To my patrons and subscribers who support this project, a huge thank you. None of this work would be possible without you all, and I'm so grateful. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope this was valuable to you in some way, and I will see you next week.